You're in the 06010.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Focus Football, presented by Wingstop, alongside Mike Clay and Field Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp, getting you ready for Week 15 of the fantasy football season. We had a Thursday night football game.
Oh, we did?
Technically we had one, but it was not fun to watch, and I do not blame you if you just dipped out at halftime because there were no touchdowns scored.
You gotta be kidding me.
None.
All this week of anticipation and excitement for the fantasy playoffs. We're here. We're ready to go. We're going to win some. We're going to put up some fantasy points, get to the next round of the playoffs, win some championships, and we get 18 points and no touchdowns.
It's a kicker battle.
Yeah, it is. I have a little bit of breaking news here.
Uh-oh.
A little bit of breaking news here in Fantasy Focus Football, exclusive Fantasy Focus Football. I had heard through the grapevine, and I did confirm, that Cooper Kupp had earned a first-round bye in his league.
Okay.
That's what it was.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
And he took that literally.
Yes. Yes, he literally did. Unfortunately, for every fantasy manager everywhere that trusted Cooper Kupp.
You got to be kidding me.
Let's dive into this Thursday night football game because there was only one wide receiver from the Rams, in spite of the fact that Cooper Kupp is also a superstar. He had 3 targets for 0 receptions.
Second time in his career he has ever gone for 0 scrimmage yards in a game.
He was like, you know what? Jaden Reed did this last week, and I want to see what it feels like.
Well, look, we're going to do this a lot over the next few weeks, but look, we have a lot of matchups going on. We all do, and it hurt us. Some of my teams got hurt a little last night, but look, I told you guys yesterday, I have a dynasty matchup with Matthew. I called up these players. I said, you need to do me a solid this week. I got to take Matthew down, and Cooper Kupp's on his team. So good start. I had Puka. He had
Love
Kupp.
it.
Good start to the week. I now take I'm the favorite. Per the projections, it's huge. It was a huge.
Who does
night
the
for me.
projections, though? Who cares?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows about
some
that?
guy
Yeah.
knows
Not a
what they're
single
doing.
catch yesterday for Puka, for Cooper Kupp. It's second time ever.
time.
Insane. And by the way, Puka Nacua, it's funny. Like if I told you coming into the game that Puka Nacua was going to get you 17.8 fantasy points, you'd be like, pretty good.
Cool.
You woke up this morning, you're like, holy crap, am I grateful?
I'm thrilled.
17.8 fantasy points. That's more than like Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, and like Jawan Jennings combined.
Yeah,
So let's just
rough
you know,
across the board.
We're at the point now where like you are literally in survival mode every single week. So if Cooper Kupp, if you get through this round with Cooper Kupp, it's not going to change my outlook for next week. I'm going to be starting Cooper Kupp next week. Puka was rock solid. Kyren Williams was fine. Kyren Williams kind of threaded that needle perfectly because it was like if you had Kyren last night. You got enough that you haven't lost your matchup. Meanwhile, if you're playing against Kyren Williams, you don't feel like you got Jamar Chase or Josh Allen from last week. You're like, all right, like if I'm facing Kyren, work to do, but definitely not out of the woods. I'm not totally dominated because of what happened last night with Kyren Williams. But I think there's 2 players that I think are worth discussing from last night in terms of like what it might look like next week or what you thought going into last night and what we ended up getting last night. If you played Isaac Guerrero, and you're disappointed by the output, it has nothing to do with the injury whatsoever. Not one thing. You should have 0 regrets about playing Isaac Guerrero last night because of the fact that he was questionable coming into the game.
He was great.
He played 76% of the snaps. He
yeah.
handled every single running back rushing opportunity.
He had 20 touches in this
He
game.
had 20 touches. He had 4 catches. Time for the team lead. 11.5 fantasy points. What are you going to do? You should have 0 regret whatsoever about playing Isaac Guerrero. He'll have 10 days to rest up for their next game. He will be back inside my top 20 next week. But Deebo Samuel's one that we got to talk about.
Yeah.
Because if you do survive, you aren't playing him next week.
No.
No,
You should have played him
you're
this
not.
week.
You're
I mean,
not.
we had him ranked
That's
outside
just
our top 35.
I thought you were going to say more than that. You're
just
but
not
you're right.
playing.
I mean, you could stop there. 19 yards last night, 35 or fewer in 5 straight games. His last touchdown was in week 6. That was also his most recent game with more than 12.5 fantasy points.
Yeah,
week 6.
Yeah.
We're in
he
almost
dropped
week,
a
we're
Whoopi
into
touchdown
week 16.
probably. Yeah, we are in week 16, or we will be by the time he plays next. There was that play last night. It's an opportunity to probably take one to the house for like a 20-yard touchdown pass, but he dropped it. He's not playing well. He is not explosive anymore. He is not a difference maker right now for this San Francisco offense. Something has to give this offseason. I am sure there are going to be a lot of difficult decisions that San Francisco has to make. But right now, if you are a defensive coordinator and you're saying to yourself, who are the guys that we got to stop in San Francisco to win this game? It starts with George Kittle, number 85.
Yep.
Next player, Jawan Jennings.
Yep.
Next player, Isaac Guerrero. That's how I stack it up at least.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you're right. I mean, there were a couple guys, like I had a little George Kittle, a lot of Kyren Williams, and it's like, okay, my week's not over.
Yeah.
You know, this could have went really poorly in a game that was 12-6. Both of those guys ended up doing okay. Someone like Juwan Jennings, that was rough too. 9 targets, 2 catches, but at least he got 9 targets. Yeah. So that's a good sign moving forward. You still feel confident in him.
So I have to remind myself, my brain right now, Daniel, is that like, yeah, I still feel the same about Juwan Jennings going forward. That's assuming you make it forward, right? Like, but if again, I will. I think there's an old Latin phrase, caveat emptor, which means like every time we say it, like it applies going forward, which is if you make it through, I would feel confident in Juwan Jennings next week as well.
Yeah. I am with you on that. Thinking about, I mean, it just felt like this entire Niners offense, it makes me think of the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him swim.
Hold on now.
What?
Makeup conversation.
That's not, is that, what?
I'm making fun of Field. Field, I love you so much, buddy. We were in makeup.
Mixed metaphors.
And we were going through metaphors, and Field was like, what's the saying? If you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him swim? And it was like,
we weren't going through metaphors, to be clear. I threw one out there. What is, and they were like, everybody in the room was like, that's not the metaphor.
That's not what the metaphor is.
What is it? It's make him drink?
You can't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But this is like, everyone had a ton of targets, to be honest. I mean, if you told me that Debo got 7 targets and still had 2 rush attempts, so 9 opportunities.
I might disagree on this one.
I would at least have a little, in my mind, I would have a little bit more confidence, obviously, after this game.
But I'm not so sure, like.
Dude, Brock Purdy was awful last night, too, and the weather didn't help. But 14 for 31, not even close to 50%, 142 passing yards, no touchdowns, and an interception, doesn't do anything with his legs. Basically, the entire offense was just completely out of sync, at least with Kyren, like you had talked about earlier. Like, Kyren got 31 touches again. If you tell me Kyron's going to touch the ball 31 times, you're going to have to sign up for that.
This game flew by as well. Like I haven't seen the exact number of snaps played by both offenses.
Well, the beginning was slow. Then it picked up. But
I mean slow, like fast as in like the number of minutes. Like the game was over at a much earlier time than most Thursday Night Football games come to an end. So I think we need to pour one out for everybody that had a Cooper Cup last night. I think we need to,
except Matthew,
like except for Matthew, yes, of course, because he's playing against Mike here. But like, I just want you guys to know that like you're not alone. You're not a dumb person for starting Cooper Cup last night. You weren't a dumb person for investing in him. He's actually been probably an investment that's paid off better than his value. Based off where he was coming into the season, you weathered the early injury. He came back, and he has been Cooper Cup for the most part. But we're here for you. And Mike, and I want the people out there who are dealing with this Cooper Cup thing this morning to let me know if they agree with my completely inarguable statement. You can't tell me that Cooper Cup's bagel hits the same if it happens Sunday at 4:05 as it does right now.
I knew you were going here. Look, as I often say, you don't start guys on Thursday night. Just bench all your Thursday players.
You don't think that one hits harder? Like,
no, you know what? There's some truth to that because last night I was sitting there watching and I was struggling because I had a lot of investment in last night's game, and I'm very fortunate because the people I was playing for the most part did as well. So I'm still like in a decent spot, and all these matchups are not dead for sure.
Yeah.
But I was sitting there like, I wish this was a Sunday game because I don't want to watch every play like this and watch Kyren getting 1 yard and then 2 yards and then negative 1 yard.
Congratulations to Mike for finally being on the right side of history.
I still started the right players.
Don't you feel like that Monday night, if this was a Monday night football game and you're like, I need 6.4 points from Cooper Cup,
that
and then he gets a 0, that would be the worst. Because then you're going to stay up the entirety of that awful game.
And you imagine you need 1 catch.
That's it.
You're down by like 0.1, and that happens. You're right. That would be substantially
the baddest
worse.
of beats. But the idea is that like on Sunday, like let's just make this up. Hey, Cooper Cup is catchless through the third quarter. Well, you might also have in a separate game. Wow, well I did start Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he's up to 7 for 75 and a touchdown already, and so it doesn't feel quite as bad. Sure. I get it. At the end of the week, the number of points you score is the number of points you score, whether they're scored on Thursday, Sunday, Monday, or somewhere in between. I'm just telling you. Me, the person who has a heart that actually functions, not is controlled by a battery and a motor like Mike's, would hate to have been the person that had Cooper Cup.
Look, I don't think many people are complaining about who they started last night because it wasn't a lot of like borderline guys. It wasn't like we were hammering like stream Stafford this week. Like it was pretty straightforward who you play. Like no one's like, I cannot believe I started Cooper Cup. Of course you start at Cooper Kupp. Like, why would you not?
Check your DMs, Mike. Check your DMs.
Yeah. No, I think people have been pretty, I don't know. I have a lot of people muted, so I don't know.
That's probably what it is. Yeah.
Mike probably had so many marks last night. He just didn't even remember what was happening.
I'm just really going to hope and project that this was not how the rest of Week 15 is going to go. We're going to talk about a few more guys coming up after the break, obviously, but hopefully you can survive what happened to Cooper Kupp here on Thursday Night Football. All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into injuries heading into Week 15. We'll see you guys in just a moment. ESPN Bet Live returns today at 6 p.m. on ESPN2 has everything that you need before betting this week's NFL slate. Aaron, Joe, and Tyler will be there throughout the weekend helping you with all the picks, props, and parlays that you need to know. Check out ESPN Bet Live. Back here on Fantasy Focus, my name is Daniel Dopp alongside Field Yates and Mike Clay. No Stephania Bell today.
Yes.
She's out at the winter meetings in
at
Dallas.
The winter meetings. Definitely not at the Niners game. Yes, last night.
No, based off Stephania's text after the game last night, she is disconsolate to say the least about her Niners. No, Stephania is actually coordinating a Cooper Kupp support group right now.
She's what it is.
Lady of the people, so she is, for everybody out there that started him, Stephania poured one out for you last night. She is doing the Lord's work for us all.
Well, in honor of Stephania Bell, we're still going to do an Answering the Bell segment in her memory. That feels weird because she's still with us, obviously, but obviously just can't be here.
It's like when Dan Campbell's like, yeah, we're going to put Frank Ragnow down this week. It's like, wait, what?
Bad phrasing. Bad phrasing there.
Oh, no, he's going to be inactive. It's like, okay. Thank you.
Let's start with Breece Hall. Unfortunately, we did not see Breece Hall last week, if you guys remember. It was Isaiah Davis, and that was, he was huge in that one, and Braylon Allen. They split the workload. Did not practice again this week. Yesterday, specifically, dealing with that knee injury.
Come on.
Mike, have you pulled him out of your projections
No,
yet?
I didn't yet. We'll see today if he practices or is rolled out. That's one of them borderline guys. I just left it go for the moment, so we'll see. Look, am I playing the Stephania role? So
I'll play the Stephania role. You give fantasy.
Well, no, I want to do that. I want to. All right. So of course, the schematic bone connects to the thermometer bone, and that goes to the trisopoles, and that's all messed up.
Trisopoles has got to be really careful.
I know, right? So I don't think he's going to play. So. But anyway, you got to watch out for that with Breece Hall this week.
Yes,
but assuming that keeps him out, it's a two-headed attack, and that's what we saw last week. I'll just run through how they were used in Week 14. 35 snaps for Braylon Allen, 33 for Isaiah Davis. The carries were 11-10 in favor of Allen, 21-18 in favor of Allen in routes. The targets actually lean toward Davis, 7-5 though, combined 12 targets, which you like to see. So in total, it was 13 to 15 carries for both. Allen had a few more yards, but Davis found the end zone. Both were in the 12 to 16 fantasy point range. I expect something similar. It looks like they're going to split it right down the middle. They were interchangeable. It wasn't like a clear lead runner and a lead pass catching guy. It was kind of split pretty evenly. So that's what we should expect. For me, I think they're both going to be flex options because one guy hasn't really taken a lead in the backfield. So that makes them both kind of risky fantasy starts this week.
Yeah, maybe not quite as productive as these guys often were, but think about earlier season Bucky Irving, Rachaad White, when they were playing close to the same number of snaps, utilized a little bit differently. But yes, both of those players in a game in which if you think the Jets can control the clock, because they're playing against the Jaguars, who, of course, are amongst the worst teams in the NFL. Perhaps more Braylon Allen this week. I do not expect, though, to reiterate what Mike was saying, Breece Hall to play this week. I think we are now officially on will the Jets shut down Breece Hall watch.
Yeah, totally fair. This is a great matchup, by the way, against Jacksonville, although I'm done picking the Jets. Jags win.
They'll win.
The Jags win. I'm taking the Jags.
No, I'll take the Jets.
You don't think so?
I think the Jets are going to win. But I just want to, we'll monitor that every single day. The Jets said they still don't have plans to shut them down, but at some point.
Not playing for a lot right now.
I mean, I kind of hope they do, just from I have him on dynasty roster situation, or I want to draft him early next year. Let's just let him rest up. There's nothing to play for now.
Well, Fields, you had mentioned Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Let's talk about them because Bucky Irving did not practice Wednesday, did not practice Thursday either. Kind of feels like we might be in that same vein that we were just talking about with Breece Hall. If there is Bucky Irving, are you playing him? And if there isn't, how high is Rachaad White going to be?
So if Bucky Irving plays, I'm going to tread lightly here because we saw what happened last week.
Exactly.
Todd Bowles has talked about this, that basically they got to get this back loosened up. And you almost, honestly, and I know this sucks for the people that have Bucky Irving without a dominant pivot available. Mm-hmm. I think you want the clarity here. I really do. I think I'd rather know that Bucky Irving isn't going to play and pivot to an inferior option. Pivot to an Isaiah Davis if that player is available because you're super worried about this guy who, during the week, is not taking any contact. Then on Sunday, taking one hit and saying, crap, my back feels, once again, very, very bad. So if they both play, I'll have Bucky Irving ranked behind Rachaad White. If there is no Bucky Irving, you feel great about Rachaad White in this matchup, even a tough matchup against the Chargers. You feel great about the likely utilization. As he played 75% of the snaps last week, did Rachaad White. We'll see some Sean Tucker, but I do believe that this will be a Rachaad White week if Bucky is out. He'll be inside my top 20.
Yeah, and keep in mind that even with Irving active last week, Rachaad White started and he played 14. He outsnapped Irving 14-10 before he left that game. After that, so let's assume here for a second that Bucky Irving is ruled out for this game. After that, Rachaad White outsnapped Sean Tucker 30-11. So there's a pretty substantial edge there. Ended up with 109 yards on those and 2 touchdowns. So and by the way, Rachaad White, even with Irving doing so well this year, 11 plus touches in all but one game this season. So he's given you a respectable floor. Also 8 touchdowns in his last 7 games. So I'm with you. I think Rachaad White becomes a lineup lock if Bucky Irving is out. And in that same scenario, Sean Tucker becomes like a desperation flex, but I don't think you're going to feel great starting him.
Just feels like they're going to buy themselves a week at least with Bucky Irving.
I hope so. They should for his sake.
And they're now atop the division again, so you can say, well, they got to win every game. Yeah, they do have to win every game. But are you trusting Atlanta now these days?
No.
That's the only competition for the division. And so, yes, it would be nice to win this game on Sunday, of course. But I think they can. I don't think they're a Bucky Irving away from winning or losing against the Chargers. And if he's not good enough to go, what's the point in having him on the roster on Sunday if you might get 8 snaps out of him?
Yeah, you have Rachaad White. Yep. I mean, you don't need to. And Sean Tucker in the spot start early this year, or was it a start or no? He played a lot in that game.
Sean Tucker against
he
the
had
Saints?
that huge game, right, where it was off the bench too.
Because of course, right?
That's how it works. Yeah.
Only Jackson Agello started them that week.
Naturally.
I hope he doesn't start. I hope he starts Sean Tucker this week because I'm playing him in the Fantasy Focus Show League. I'd love to be able. Actually, you know what? Maybe I don't want to put that out there either. Not with what he did last time.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Field, I'm going to come back to you on this. Ladd McConkey did not play last week. He's been limited in his 2 practices this week, obviously dealing with some stuff. Do you get a sense on whether or not he may go from Jim Harbaugh or not?
I get a sense on him going this week. Okay. He was really close last week. He was a game-time decision, and it was one of those that was a legitimate game-time decision. So the fact that he was that close this week, he's practiced both days this week as well, to me suggests he will play. And if he does, you feel really good about Ladd. He has been trending up of late. It is a good matchup. It's a great matchup, I should say.
No doubt.
I don't know if they're traveling today, Friday, but a lot of times teams going from the full West Coast to the full East Coast will travel 2 days before. So we might have some clarity about Ladd as soon as today as opposed to tomorrow, which is when away teams normally downgrade players that don't travel to out. On top of that, he's just a good player, right? Good player, Herbo in a good spot. But if he doesn't play, Mike, we do have a nice replacement for him.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by this, but Josh Palmer literally just replaced him in the slot.
Yep.
Josh Palmer, who we're used to being a perimeter receiver, just took over, and he did well. He had 9 targets in the game, 6 catches, 78 yards. So he's out there in a ton of leagues right now, available in ESPN fantasy leagues, and a ton of them. You can scoop him up, and he's a natural replacement. So if you're sitting here watching this right now, you might want to pick him up, throw him on your bench as a backup plan at this point. In the year, you probably have an available bench spot you can use for something like that.
I might go see if I can find him in a league right now. Why not?
There you go.
If Ladd McConkey does go,
help Field.
You had kind of mentioned, I mean, outside of not playing last week, his 3 previous games, he was cruising. 6 for 123.
He's been legit.
18 fantasy points, 6 for 83, over 14 fantasy points, and then 9 for 117 on 11 targets.
Career high. Career high in targets and catches in that game for him.
So, yeah, he had been trending up. Hopefully, we're able to get him back here for the fantasy playoffs. Mike, I'm going to ask you about Kenneth Walker III. Did not practice Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday, dealing with a calf injury. We obviously saw he did not play last week because Zach Charbonnet just absolutely smashed. I think this is, and we talked about this after the show, this is one of the easiest if-then conversations in the NFL.
Yeah.
If Ken Walker goes, Mike, it feels like you're playing him. If he doesn't, Zach Charbonnet just fills that spot.
Yeah, it's interesting. When Walker has played, they're our guy. He's our guy. Yeah. He's been the lead back, and he's been trending down. He had 14-plus fantasy points in 5 straight games to open the season. He's been under 14 in his last 5, which is a little bit concerning. Again, if Walker plays, I still feel like they've told us he's our lead back, so you could start him. You don't feel as strong as early this year, but you still start him. Charbonnet in 10 games with Walker, averaging 6.4 touches and 6.8 fantasy points per game. He goes to the bench. But yeah, the 3 games without Walker this season, Charbonnet has crushed it. 69 yards and a touchdown, 107 yards and 2 touchdowns, 193 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, career
high across the board last week in every category. As you know, Field, because he single-handedly knocked you out of the Focus playoff.
Correct.
Thankfully, he was available available for me, but just crushing it. Yeah.
Silly question, and I would love to know, Field, your thought on this. When we've watched so many backfields operate with like a really efficient two-headed committee, why do you feel like the Seahawks, when they've seen how good Zach Charbonnet can be when there is no Ken Walker, why do they not utilize 2 running backs more in their backfield?
It might be that they do going forard. It's a new staff, so maybe they feel like a new offensive staff at least. Maybe they felt like he needed to earn it, prove it a little bit more. I don't have a good reason.
From a fantasy perspective, I think he's earned it. I just want to say that.
Yeah, no, he certainly has.
Coaching staff.
And I'll just reiterate what I said in the case of both Bucky Irving and also who was the Breece Hall. Like, you want clarity here. Like, you guys would prefer. I don't want Kenneth Walker III to miss a game. He's a really good player, and obviously he's been largely solid this season. But you just don't want this guy. Like, I would be more worried if he is active, and Charbonnet obviously would be active as well, and then Walker, even if he doesn't get hurt and leave the game, if he plays like 45% of the snaps because they're managing a calf injury, right? I mean, like, that would be scary to me. So, obviously, if you have Charbonnet, it's not as big of a deal, but I still think you want the clarity here. Like, it's week 15, it's the fantasy football playoffs, the last thing you want. Like, as much as last night sucked for Cooper Kupp or Isaac Guerrero, those guys played all the time.
Yes.
Like, let the chips fall how they do. What you hate is when a guy is... Remember T. Higgins famously last year, the year before, had a hamstring injury and was active and played 1 snap. Yeah. We don't want those.
Or what we saw from Irving last week, same thing. Played 10 snaps and just got you nothing and was out. Yeah, I'm with you.
Here's a question. In that same Dynasty League where Mike is playing Matthew, I'm on a bye this week.
Right.
But I have Zach Charbonnet. Do I start him over DeAndre Swift, even though it's a bye?
During the bye week?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You
got to rest them guys up.
Yeah.
All right. We'll think about that. All right. When we come back, we got more start-sit conversations for you here on Fantasy Focus, helping you figure out Week 15. We'll see you guys in just a moment. Remember to tune into Fantasy Football Now on Sunday to join Mike Clay, Field Yates, Stephania Bell, Damian Woody, and Liz Loza as we get you ready for Week 15 of the fantasy football season. From injuries to rankings, we have got you covered. Find us on ESPN2 this Sunday, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, all the way up until kickoff. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Field Yates and Mike Clay. My name is Daniel Dopp. We're diving into some start-sit conversations here in Week 15. Let's start with, I think, one that has been a little bit more frustrating for fantasy managers this year, the Jaguars' backfield. Yeah, we've seen Tank Bigsby come on and play really nice. I mean, obviously, this year, at times, not certainly from a consistent basis. But obviously, Travis Etienne is also there as well. Travis Etienne, 5 games between 11 and 14.8 fantasy points, 6 games with single digits. So his high game this year was 14.8 fantasy points. He's had 6 single-digit games. How are you approaching either one of these? Mike, I'll start with you with the projections. How are you approaching them in Week 15?
Well, I think we have to adjust a little bit based on what we saw last week. You know, we have Tank Bigsby back. He was healthy in that game, and we saw a changeup for Jacksonville. Bigsby, the snaps were even. It was 30 to 28 in favor of Tank Bigsby, but he had 18 carries to just 4 for Travis Etienne. Etienne did run more routes, 15 to 10, and doubled them up in targets, 4 to 2. And Bigsby's still running it well, 5 yards per carry this season. He doesn't do much in the passing game, but I think it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good comp, like Henry and Justice Hill sort of right now. Like maybe, Bigsby is clearly, the snaps are pretty even, believe it or not, between Hill and Henry, but it's like most of the carries are going to go to Henry, and in this case, Bigsby, and then all of the passing down work for almost all of it is going to go to the other running back. So I think that, I have Bigsby ranked 31st, I have Etienne 28th because of that passing down work, and I'm still assuming that Etienne will eat into the carries a little more than last week just based on the full body of work, but I think both of these guys right now should be viewed as low ceiling flex options. There's just not a lot to love. That's a bad offense.
That's the best succinct way to put it, is low ceiling flex options, because Etienne's yet to get over 14 points this season.
Correct. Yeah.
Tank Bigsby, in order to get to 14 plus, needs like 85 yards and a touchdown.
Yep.
I think that some of this comes down to how confident you feel in the Jaguars keeping this close against the Jets, because the numbers that Mike laid out were a game in which Jacksonville won against Tennessee. The Jets have done very little to inspire confidence this year. I believe the Jets, if they play like they did last week, will smother the Jaguars this week. I know the Jets ended up losing, but I thought they played largely well against the Dolphins team that I think is playing better ball.
Yep.
So I have them as essentially a coin flip as well. If I have Tank Bigsby, the fear is it's 14-0 after the first quarter, and then you don't see him hardly at all for the rest of the way. And then for Etienne, the fear is that they hang around for a while and he ends up with same number of snaps as Tank Bigsby, but he gets 3 catches for 27 yards as opposed to 4 catches for 50 yards last week, and he turns his 3 carries into 9 yards. So very, very concerning to start either player this week.
It's funny. Sorry, Daniel. When we say like a guy, that guy doesn't have much of a ceiling or he's low ceiling, usually it's like that's because they've only had like 2 or 3 big games.
Yeah.
Like Etienne literally has no ceiling. Like he has not had one good game this whole season. Definitely at probably the top of the list for biggest bust this year. Injury aside, it hasn't been injury related. He just has not performed.
Honestly, I don't know who would have ever had confidence in Anthony Richardson, but at least Richardson's giving you.
Yeah, couple of 20-point weeks,
3.
Right? Yeah.
Hello.
I mean, they're both about as usable as each other. I mean, just
doesn't feel great.
Etienne went before Richardson by quite a bit. I mean, he was what, 3rd in touches last year?
Yep.
3rd in fantasy points per game, Etienne.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a head scratcher. I wonder if he'll get a fresh start elsewhere next year and be a what? You don't think so?
Do like $12 million fully guaranteed.
Oh, he's on that. Oh, the option here. Oh, yeah. I thought we'll see. All right.
The Jets, for what it's worth, have only allowed 8 running backs to reach 12.2 fantasy points. So not only does it not, and we're in week 15. So basically like half of their games, they haven't allowed running backs to top 12.2. Knowing that there's already not a ceiling for Travis Etienne, it feels like that floor is just as low as ever. I understand what you guys are saying with where you have him ranked, like very low-end flex options. I would rather just sit them both. I think with no teams on the bye, I likely have a wide receiver I would rather play in my flex than either one of these guys.
I'd say if you're ranked below RB like 24 for me, you're considered a bench in my roster.
Yeah, because you likely want a receiver in that flex spot.
Yes, you do, except for Cooper Kupp.
Field, how do you feel about Tank Dell this week? More single-digit finishes this year than games over 10 fantasy points.
Can I just say this before you jump in there? Like, guy's named Tank. Come on, like we want to start you. We want to like you.
Back-to-back tanks.
Back-to-back tanks.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, this is not good, Tanks.
Tank Dell, sort of like Travis Etienne this year. Not a lot of upside. He's yet to reach even 19 fantasy points in a game. For a guy who looked like he was one of the steals of the draft last year and a dynasty gem, he has not been that, as he has 4 straight games with 72 or fewer receiving yards. He has 2 touchdown catches all season. By the way, the Dolphins, a tougher matchup, as we know. They have been largely stingy against opposing wide receivers all season. I don't know if this is a Tank Dell thing so much as a C.J. Stroud thing in some ways, because Dell is still seeing good volume. On top of that, like, what was the biggest impediment to him having a great season coming into the year?
Stephon Diggs.
Correct. And Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs have both been out for a stretch at the same time. And even as wide receiver 1 in this offense, Tank Dell couldn't get the job done. So I think certainly some of it is on him, but I do wonder if C.J. Stroud's regression this year has probably been the more driving force. But he is wide receiver 49 for me prior to the Thursday Night Football players being removed. I did have Puka Nacua ahead of him. I did not have Debo or Cooper Kupp ahead of him. So only Puka has been removed. So he's been living at one spot.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, last year
he just went right over Mike's head.
But I was on to the next thing.
I said that I had Cooper Kupp and Debo Samuel ranked behind Tank Dell going.
Oh, good. Okay, well that's smart.
Yes.
I mean, that's going to work out great for you. Last year Dell played in 11 games. This year 12 games, so almost even in terms of games played. Last year he had 760 yards and 7 touchdowns. This year he has 571 and 2 touchdowns. Yeah. The efficiency has gone from like elite at receiver to horrendous at receiver this year. The connection's just not there. But speaking of the quarterback situation, you often say like, 1-2 games in, you got to make a call on these quarterbacks, how good they are, right? I mean, it was a done deal. Stroud, a great find. Bryce Young, bust. I mean, it's not looking so clear-cut right now. So.
Yeah, wow, that will be a fast. I still think it's C.J. Stroud, but at least the
but
debate.
It's not as, it's definitely closer.
I don't think that he's the superstar that we all hailed him as coming out of his rookie season.
Not yet.
And not for fantasy, at least. Yeah.
Yes, it's definitely not for fantasy.
We'll see. He's,
Mike, I want to ask you about DeAndre Swift. He's topped 9.5 fantasy points one time in the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, that's right.
One time. And now he gets the Minnesota Vikings, who maybe you have some numbers on this, but I think they're pretty good against fantasy running backs.
I do. 3rd fewest yards, only 8 touchdowns, and the 4th fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs so far this season. You mentioned Swift has been struggling as of late, so we still have him as a flex option, and I think that's appropriate because this is a guy that has at least 13 touches in every single game this season. So there's at least somewhat of a floor there where you can throw him in. He's still the clear lead back there. We'll see on Roschon Johnson's status, but regardless, Swift is their lead back. I don't think he's a lineup lock right now, but he's definitely a guy that you could feel okay about in the flex.
Yeah, does he reach that running back spot where
he does not? Okay. Yeah, he's outside of it just by one spot after the guys were removed last night. So you had 2 players removed. So he goes into the week as RB27 for me with 2 players removed last night. But like the underlying metrics, like if I told you without naming the player, the team, the offensive situation, the guy was going to get you probably close to 15 touches with some of that, not all of it, but some of it being receiving work, you'd say that's like a flex / low-end RB2.
Absolutely.
It's just the offense hasn't been great. He hasn't been efficient. So he moves down from a low-end RB2 to more of a flex consideration.
Yeah. Vikings have only allowed 4 running backs to reach 12.3 fantasy points this year. Only 7 running backs have even hit double digits against them. They have just been lights out against the running back position. I would have him as a sit this week. Again, just because no team's on a bye, I likely can put a wide receiver in my flex that I have more confidence in. Although, I mean, just like you said, Field, that was the same conversation that I was thinking. If you tell me that DeAndre Swift was getting basically 15 touches, it's like, well, he's got to at least be a borderline starter then with that kind of workload. But
yeah, and he did have a stretch there. He had middle of the season, he was getting hot, and then all of a sudden he has regressed right back
in a
down.
win or go home week, it feels a little bit harder for me to put him into that start.
Yeah, hopefully you don't need to go. Hopefully your team's good enough you don't have to. But the first round of the playoffs, you might need him.
Yep, sure do. Yeah.
Field, what about Amari Cooper?
Oh,
Since joining the Bills in Week 7. Here's how his target volume has worked since joining the Bills. 5 targets, 2 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, and then 14 targets last week.
Yeah, but how about this? This is even crazier. So in the 3 games prior to last week, when he had 14 targets, Amari Cooper had 6 total catches. All right?
Oh, my gosh.
Mm-hmm. He had 14 targets last week. How many routes do you think he ran last week?
Not a lot. I think it was probably like 26
65.
or something.
23 routes.
Yeah.
Wow. So basically 2 out of every 3 routes that he ran, he was getting the football. It's insane. Like, you never see that. Like, I believe that, like, Cooper Kupp earlier this season was atop the NFL in terms of, like, target share per route run, and it was, like, around 37, 38%. Amari Cooper last week, 14 in 23. So I'm his wide receiver for that. I'm pretty nervous about this one.
Is this one of those, Mike, do you think that there's going to be a problem against this Lions secondary? Is this a good matchup for Cooper or a bad matchup?
I would say it's not good unless they're just trailing and have to throw like last week where it was just nonstop. But we do expect Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid could come back, and that's more targets or fewer targets to go around. But the Lions have a lot of the 8th fewest fantasy points to receivers over their last 4 games. They're trending the right direction. But yeah, look, last week Cooper had his 14 targets. Only Jamar Chase had more last week. And how about this? The ultimate field Yates stat. You ready for this one?
I'm ready for it. Bring it.
I did tweet this, so you might have saw it. 246 air yards for Amari Cooper last week. That was more than any player has had in a single game this entire season this year.
Awesome.
So pretty wild. They were trying to get him the ball. And unfortunately, though, it didn't really lead to a lot, considering those air yards and those targets. He had 6 catches for 95 yards.
So
I don't know. I don't think there's a reason to feel super optimistic after last week, especially with those 2 other guys coming back. So he's wide receiver. He's right inside my top 50 this week. So deep league flex.
Yeah, that's basically outside of, if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, he's outside your starting conversation, unfortunately, this week. Gosh, there's a lot of guys here that makes it's so tough here in week 15 because you're over-analyzing so many of the decisions you make because you don't want to go home. When we come back, we got a couple more pass catchers that we are going to give you some confidence levels on here on Fantasy Focus Football. Stick around. We'll see you guys in just a moment. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook to claim your new player bonus and for a limited time, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY to get started today. Back here on Fantasy Focus, my name is Daniel Dopp alongside Field Yates and Mike Clay. Guys, let's do a Week 15 pass catcher confidence meter.
Okay. What's the scale?
Scale is 1 to 10, 1 being no confidence, 10 being all the confidence in the world.
Okay, I actually already knew that. I just wanted to ask it so the audience also knows it. I also wanted to clarify that, like, if I have a player ranked as wide receiver 1, that does not automatically mean he's at a 10. And if he's wide receiver 49, it means he's at a 1 or a 0. Like, no, there's some nuance involved in our analysis.
I like it, Field. All right, I'm going to start with Mike, just because we're going to start with the Philadelphia Eagle, if you don't
I know them.
Yates. Devonta Smith. How are you approaching him? I got a bunch of stuff I want to say, but I'm going to let you lead this off. Where are you
What's
at
your
with
number?
Devonta
I
Smith?
mean, very specific numbers.
Yeah, I have a couple numbers. You want some numbers?
I want your confidence level number, and then I want your other numbers too.
My confidence number, I mean, based on what you generally expect from him, is probably like a 4 or a 3.
I went 5.02 is what my
5.02.
I have a 4 on my sheet.
You're a 4. Okay, so we're on the same page here, and I think it's justified because 7 games since A.J. Brown returned in Week 6, 4.9 targets per game, has not cleared 7. That is not good enough. 15-plus fantasy points in 3 of those 7 games, so at least he's hit for a touchdown here or there, but under 7 fantasy points 3 times. So he's been very boom bust. Did have the touchdown last week, but only 37 yards and 6 targets in that game. And they're playing Pittsburgh. I mean, here's what's interesting about the Steelers. Only 9 touchdowns, 6 fewest fantasy points to receivers. That's kind of the straightforward number. But think about this. No wide receiver has reached 23 fantasy points against them this season. So if you're like, well, maybe one gets there this week. He's the second most likely Eagles receiver to be the first guy to get to 23 fantasy
squeaky
points.
wheel A.J. Brown would be that
Maybe. So if you start Devonta Smith, and again, if you start 3 receivers and a flex, you might be taking that shot this week. You're hoping that he catches like a 42-yard touchdown. I mean, that's probably your only chance to have a decent fantasy day. So, yeah, I'm not feeling great about it right now. And it's not, by the way, I'll just end with this. It's not necessarily a bad thing for the Eagles because we've talked about this. I think it was earlier this week. They haven't really needed to throw. They're run heavier than they have ever been in the Jalen Hurts era, especially near the goal line because it's all Barkley and Jalen Hurts. So that's fine for them. But from a fantasy perspective, it's been brutal.
Doesn't feel good. What was the number that you gave on touchdowns for the Steelers?
They have allowed 9 to receivers.
That's 4th fewest in the NFL to the wide receiver position. So obviously with not the amount of volume we're hoping for from Devonta Smith, it just brings that confidence level for all of us down to a spot
5.02 is the correct number.
5.02?
Yeah,
right,
5.02. So you're kind of in the middle there in terms of confidence. You're like some confidence.
All right. Field, I'm going to go to you with this next one. Justin Jefferson taking on the Chicago Bears. What's your confidence level?
Well, it's an 8.14, even though he has wide receiver 2 for the week. The only reason why it's not a 10, and this is the only number that I have to offer because everybody knows all of the greatness of Justin Jefferson, as we saw last week. When they played the Bears, not that long ago.
Correct. Yeah.
2 catches, 27 yards. He got Jalen Johnsoned a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Did you read about that in the Shadow Report?
I did.
I don't know what the Shadow Report is.
Oh, okay. So you didn't.
I don't have the internet, so.
Oh, you don't?
It is?
Okay.
Yeah.
You just watch the games on you have one of them knobs on your old.
I read the newspaper.
TV? Oh, you read the newspaper the next day.
Those rabbit ears that he puts on top of his big TV.
So like Monday night, you won't know what happens I'm surprised you know what happened last night then, because you wouldn't get that till Saturday's paper.
We were talking in the makeup room before.
Okay. Oh, you filled it in.
I actually did. I don't know if you guys ever had this happen, but we obviously live in an area where the local newspaper of record is the Hartford Courant. And I think they do like an every once in a while courtesy paper just to try to incentivize people to try to sign up for the Courant. So this morning I did have a Courant in my driveway and I showed it to my daughter and she was completely mystified.
She's like, what is this?
She was like, I have literally no idea what you're talking about.
I'm that age where when I first started playing fantasy football, I literally had to use the newspaper. And Monday Night Football's box score was not in the Tuesday paper because that game used to end and later than they do now.
Yeah.
So that box score wasn't there till Wednesday. You wouldn't know if you won till then.
Is that where you started your career? Were you a print guy at first, writing for newspapers by any chance?
No, I mean, I did write. I did contribute during college to our local paper, the Pottsville Republican. I was a sports editor for our school paper, so I get in a way, I guess. But I was already doing nerdy football stuff way before that.
All right. Give me your confidence level. Field, you said 8.14. All right. I still am at a 10 for Justin Jefferson.
Oh wow.
Because it's Justin Jefferson.
I'll give some respect to Jalen Johnson here. Also, the Bears have been really good against receivers. They not as much lately, but Jalen Johnson's really good, and he's going to be on him again. So I'll say 7.274.
Wow, okay.
Nice.
Clearly high.
Is that like pi repeating right there?
I don't know. I'm just trying to play along with your bit.
Thank you. It's working.
It's working. All right, let's talk about Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Calvin Ridley, for me, I got to be honest, somewhere between like a 4 and a 6 based on how hopeful of a mood I'm in.
Okay.
This one was a little bit tougher for me. After 3 straight games where he only saw 6 targets, he did see 12 targets last week. That didn't turn into production that we had hoped for, unfortunately. Only 12.9 fantasy points. But 11 different wide receivers have hit at least 16 fantasy points against the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yep.
There's a chance that it feels like Cincy's going to be throwing the ball a lot, which means that Titans are going to have to throw the ball a lot. Field, where are you at on
6.48.
Okay.
6.48 for Calvin Ridley. So a little bit more
You're at the
optimistic.
high end of my side.
You mentioned the 9 straight games with 6 or more targets for Calvin Ridley, and he has 9 or more targets in 6 of those 9 games. A lot of numbers right there for you. Again, I'll defer to Mike for the numbers, but good matchup here. If they can't get the job done, man.
Didn't we say that same sentence last week, though, Field?
That's where I was going.
Okay.
If they can't get the job done against the Cincinnati Bengals, we got some real problems here. Like, I find Will Levis, from a real-life perspective, as like one of the most fascinating players to decide upon this offseason because Tennessee might have a top 5 pick, and it's not a great quarterback draft class to be quarterback 3 this year. What do you do with this guy? If he can't get the job done in back-to-back weeks in great spots, whew.
Yeah, it's rough. I'm going to go 5.001.
Okay.
I'll give him just a hair over.
Just over the 5.
Over 5.
Okay.
Yeah, 12 targets and 7 catches last week. He leads all receivers, leads the entire NFL in air yards this season. Obviously, that's transferred to or converted to very boom-bust production this season.
That's why I don't like air yards.
3 times. Well, say it has its value here or there, but good matchup against the Bengals, like you said. So I don't know. I mean, again, I said all that volume last week, just 59 yards, still didn't score a touchdown. He's only found the end zone in 2 different games this season. So I don't know. He was a guy I liked a lot in the preseason, and the volume was there. The volume has been there all year, and it just hasn't converted. It's really disappointing.
How crazy is it that he's only found the end zone in 2 different games, and Nick Westbrook-Akine has just been breaking your model just over and over and over and
ridiculous
over again. All right, I got one more I'm going to throw at you, Mike Clay. Jaden Reed, after a goose egg last week, what is your number on the confidence meter?
5.001.
Yeah, this is a hard one, but I mean it's the same thing as Ridley. It's just like a total toss-up. I'll go 4.82.
Yeah, a little high.
I agree.
A little high.
My confidence level is okay. I had a 2 for my confidence level.
Yeah, they're that low. I mean, I'm just giving him. Like, I think he's a good player, and we've seen him have big games at times this season. I mean, last week was rough for sure, but he has had 19 plus 3 times, including week 13. He had that 2-touchdown game just a couple of weeks ago. Target share is down a little from last year. That's a red flag. Overall volume is concerning, but, I will say that Seattle is worse against the slot than they are the perimeter, so maybe that helps his cause a little bit in this matchup, but I've been 39, so... Yeah, a little bit lower than Ridley. That's why the score is a little lower.
He's only got 1 game this year with more than 6 targets. And I think that's the part
Is that week 1?
I'm not sure.
Either week 1 or week 4, because there was 2 big games.
2 big games.
You know what's happening? He's taken the Debo Samuel comparison way too
literally.
Yeah.
By the way, Luke Musgrave could be back this week.
Okay.
So they might run more 2 tight end sets, which wouldn't necessarily mean that Jaden Reed's off the field, but Romeo Dobbs should be back this week as well. He had 6 catches all the way back in week 6, did Romeo Dobbs.
Wow.
Against the Cardinals. But, he's a tricky player. I said 3.74 because in the bottom line number is bad. Over his last 8 games, he has 3 or fewer catches in 7 of those.
Yeah.
But he also this season has a wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 overall finish.
Mm-hmm. Kind of just feels like him, this is not a great comparison, but it feels like him and Christian Watson are just trading off boom weeks.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know which one of them to pick on any given week. I don't feel enough confidence in a win-or-go-home matchup to be like, I'm going to plant my flag, which might be illegal if you're in the state of Ohio, so don't do it if you're there.
Don't do it, yeah.
All right, but for me to plant my flag on any of these Packers wide receivers, it used to be like we would say, I don't love any of them, but I clearly have the most confidence in Jaden Reed. I don't know if I can say I clearly have the most confidence in Jaden Reed anymore.
Mike, let me ask you a question. Do you now know what it means to bring the boom or no?
Kind of.
Okay.
I've gotten some content from our producer, Addison, in the last couple of days since Sunday's show.
Yes.
With information about these people that you guys are speaking of.
These people, you make it seem like they're Martians.
I don't know. Maybe they are. Are they the people in the
flying
UFOs,
the drones,
flying
in
the
New Jersey?
drones all over?
Oh my gosh!
They're making their way to Connecticut now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what they are.
There's so much happening with
Is that who those guys are?
Maybe no. It's
we're gonna have to
bring the
boomers.
AJ and Big Justice. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It'll make more sense.
Boomers.
It's a family affair, actually. All 4 of them.
Okay, I got you. Yep. I know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Plus the Rizzler.
Yeah.
That guy's on fire too.
We're talking baseball. Is that true? Is that what's happening right now?
Anthony Rizzo, was you're thinking.
Oh, Rizzo. There we go.
Look, it's football season. I'm studying the stats and watching the tape. I don't have time for this social media nonsense.
Crap.
Yep. I don't know what we're talking about.
All right. Well, when we come back, we got more here on Fantasy Focus to help you with your Week 15 lineup. We'll see you guys in just a moment. The best part of ESPN Fantasy is you guys, the fantasy football community, and we want to make sure that we are always answering your questions. So head on over to Twitter to use the hashtag FFNow to drop in your questions for Eric Moody, Liz Loza, and Tyler Fulgham this Sunday on Fantasy Football Now. That's right, use the hashtag FFNow and tune in this Sunday on ESPN2 at 10 a.m. Eastern to see if you make it onto the show.
News.
Yeah, we got some news.
All right, go ahead, Field Yates.
Evan Ingram out for the year. Damn it.
Yeah, that's
Jaguars tight end Evan Ingram out for the season because of shoulder surgery. Brutal. We talked about him yesterday, and we said we'd bring him up at some point over the next couple of days. We did not think we'd be bringing him up because he's out for the year, but he had missed practice earlier on this week. And for the Jaguars, again, they're making business decisions right now. I don't know. I mean, if he needs shoulder surgery, take it from this guy. 3 months later, I'm still going through it. So, I understand how severe these things can be. Oh, it's a torn labrum. Wow. Same thing. Evan, I got some tips.
Yeah, you've been there, Field.
I have. I am quite literally. I am 3 days and 2 months removed from surgery right now.
Did I also see from Mary Kay Cabot that there's a chance that David Njoku is not going to go?
Sounds like he might not go as well this week. We'll talk about obviously that one. Yeah, I saw Mike zeroed him out. We'll talk about Njoku if we have definitive clarity, obviously on Sunday. But yeah, this one sucks for Ingram. Next man up in that tight end room is obviously Brenton Strange, who's been fine filling in for Ingram. Not great, but fine. But yeah, an offense that is severely limited.
Yeah, which backup tight end do you want catching passes from Mac Jones?
It's going to be Brian Thomas Jr., and that's it in this offense.
Yeah, and as we talked about yesterday, he had an absurd amount of volume last week. They're going to try to get it to him as often as possible. That's concerning a little bit, too, that he's just going to get,
blanketed.
Yeah, exactly.
Sauce Gardner's going to fall every play.
Yeah,
he won't.
Yeah,
But,
they won't. They don't. It doesn't. They don't shadow, but they don't need to because they have DJ Reed on the other side. But this is a tough spot. So it's a tough break for Jacksonville, but we'll see. They'll rest these guys up for next year.
That's brutal. All right, let's dive into this segment. It's going to be an over/under here, my friends. We're looking at a couple of players here based on what they did last week. We're going to take the over or under on what last week's performances were. Tua scored 23.5 fantasy points in Week 14 against the Jets. Mike, I'm going to start with you. Taking on the Houston Texans. Are you going over or under 23.5 fantasy points for Tua this week?
Well, this is easy for me because I could just look at the projection for this week.
Yeah, I shouldn't have started with you. This was a mistake.
15.8. That is slightly under 23, I would say. Just look. I'll be honest here. I keep expecting him to come back to earth because he's been so dependent on massive passing volume, and that's a hard thing to keep rolling when you're not doing anything with your legs and keep up these high fantasy point totals. 9 rushing yards over his last 6 games, but he has at least 288 passing yards and 2+ passing touchdowns in 4 straight games. So he's hit this number in 4 straight, but I'm still a little bit pessimistic. He's going to keep this rolling, and he plays Houston. They've allowed the most passing touchdowns this year, but they have the second most sacks and interceptions, the 5th lowest EPA allowed to the pass. They are a stingy defense. Just for whatever reason, they've given up a lot of passing touchdowns. So I think he goes under.
Field, I'm going to ask you this question.
Yeah.
Only 2 quarterbacks have hit 23 fantasy points against them this year. Do you know who any of them were?
Against the Texans?
Yep.
Gardner Minshew?
Sam Darnold.
Oh, he's good.
And Anthony Richardson.
Wow. He's really good.
The idea that only 2 guys have done that. Now, Tua has just throwing the ball a ton. I do want to say that. He's quarterback 1 in pass attempts over the last 4 or 5
weeks. Yeah.
So he's been absolutely smashing in the volume department, but I would also take the under just given what Houston's defense has done.
Yeah, if this is almost like a red zone question, it's kind of I would take the under, I would play the odds here, but I do still feel pretty good about Tua in general just because of how great he has been. He's the highest scoring quarterback in all of fantasy over the past 4 weeks. We've said all the numbers already. I'll give more of the qualitative side of this. It's just Tua, there was a time about 2 months ago when whoever was talking about football was saying this guy needs to retire. Tua had to make a decision that he felt was best for himself and his family, and he did. And I am just thrilled that Tua is playing the kind of way that he is because he has been fantastic for the Dolphins. The offense, as we talked about on yesterday's show, a little bit better in the passing game for the wide receivers of late. But yeah, so Tua has been awesome. He's not going to quite reach 23 in my book, but he might get you 19, which is pretty darn good to me.
Still a top 12 quarterback?
Agreed. That's where I'm at.
That's where I've got him as well.
I'm a QB 12 as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so he's in that range here in 10 or 12 team leagues. Field, I'm going to ask you about A.J. Brown. Only 8.3 fantasy points against the Carolina Panthers last week, taking on the Steelers, who, by the way, have allowed 21 different wide receivers to hit 8.3 fantasy points. I mean, you got to take the over on this,
You have
right?
to take the over here. This is not like asking, can A.J. Brown get to 18.3? 8.3 fantasy points. You know, I think I would argue the biggest fantasy storyline going into Week 15 is, will the Eagles feature A.J. Brown? Mm-hmm. Mike, I know listen, they've won 9 straight games.
Yeah.
This is not a reeling team, right? This is not a team like, I don't know, whoever you think is on the most precipitous slide right now that is sort of skating on thin ice. This is a team that's very well positioned for a top 2 seed in the NFC. I'm not going to crush the Eagles for the way that they are playing right now, but I believe that teams of this caliber are not going to be measured by their regular season record, but rather how they handle playing against the highest tier teams. And I believe in order for Philadelphia to beat a team of the caliber of Detroit in the playoffs, or Kansas City or Pittsburgh if they're playing them in the Super Bowl, they got to have a more prolific passing attack. No time like the present to get that passing attack warmed up. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. I'm going over.
I'm still trying to figure out, and I don't know if you get a better sense of this being an Eagles fan, Mike, like how accurate is the media played dissonance between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown? Or is this one of those things where we're manufacturing something that isn't really there?
I don't know. It's a tricky one to navigate because Brandon Graham made some comments, and that's what kind of stirred it up. And then he said, that's actually not true. But there's always been something there that's kind of been like a back and forth even since last season. But I will say this, and I mentioned this earlier in the show to some extent, but A.J. Brown, do you know his target share is this season?
Not good enough, Mike.
16%.
112 air yards a game.
But seriously.
I would assume that he's probably like 28%.
What did you say?
25.
It's 32%. That's where he's been. I mean, that's higher.
So there's a super low
I mean, that is a
offense.
massive number. That's exactly right. Not only are they extremely run heavy, they're also winning all these games. They've had a very easy schedule. That has helped. And they just haven't needed them. If you watch Eagles games, it's like they don't need to. Barkley runs long touchdowns, Hurts score. It hasn't been necessary. But you're right. I mean, they might need it this week, and they might need it in bigger games in the playoffs. But I feel like it's still sitting there in the arsenal. And if they throw it to him 32% of the time in a game where they're trailing or have to throw, the numbers are going to look great because we know how good of a player he is. It's just not as big of a concern for me as long as their relationship's okay. And I think it is to enough of an extent that they're throwing to him a lot. I mean, a third of the targets. If they throw the ball 1/3 of the time, it's going to A.J. Brown.
Enough people that I follow on Twitter who are deeply invested in this team. And Mike is obviously as deeply invested as anybody. But I've seen some really thoughtful analysis. I'll point to a friend of mine, Fran Duffy, who Mike I'm sure knows as well. He used to work for the Eagles. Yep. He's an outstanding football mind, does great draft work now for the All City Network, and does a lot of Eagles coverage. And he was showing these videos of last week's game where it's like, here are examples of plays where this is what A.J. Brown would be frustrated over, right? And it's like there was an early play that a lot of people have now pointed to where it's like A.J. Brown runs a post corner and is seemingly, by NFL standards, wide open. And Jalen just kind of like breezes past that, and next thing you know, like throws like an 8-yard dump off, and you're just like, okay, it's not a sack, it's not a pick six, but why take the 8-yard pass when there's a pretty darn good opportunity for a 45-yard pass down the field? So we've kind of gotten off the I've gotten off the target here. I think the answer is over. For incredibly selfish reasons, I hope that the answer is over this week, and then over again next week, and then over again the week after that.
Yeah, I'm going over, by the way. Yeah.
Aren't you playing Damian Dabrowski in the Dynasty League this week?
Yes, and he does have A.J. Brown. But I'm a man of the people here.
All right. Good for you, Field Yates. All right, Mike Clay, I'm going to ask you about Drake London.
Okay.
Got 12 fantasy points in Week 14 against Minnesota, taking on the Raiders. His volume has been redonkulous over the last 4 weeks, unfortunately. It's just the production with Kirk Cousins has been up and down.
When's the last time Kirk Cousins threw a touchdown?
Over a month ago.
4 full. That's unbelievable.
Did you see the stat from Pro Football Talk?
Yeah, with the interceptions versus touchdowns?
He's the only player in NFL history to play 4 consecutive games and throw 0 or fewer touchdowns. You can't throw fewer, or 8 or more interceptions in that 4-game stretch.
Unbelievable.
I feel like you can throw fewer than 0 touchdowns if you throw a pick six, for what it's worth.
That should count as a negative one. Yeah, maybe we should add that to fantasy score. I'm still going over here, though. I'm at 14.9. You mentioned the volume, 11.3 targets per game in his last 4, at least 60 yards in all 4. No touchdowns, but still averaging 14 fantasy points per game. And you think about that, 14 fantasy points per game without a single touchdown. That's pretty good, and it shows that you're catching a lot of balls and putting up a lot of yardage. So, yeah, sticking it out here with Drake London, who I have in the FF Now League. So, and you have him in the Dynasty League. You're on a bye, but
he's still starting for me in that.
You know what's surprising, though? So I agree, it's over. How many 100-yard games do you think Drake London has this season?
Ooh, maybe one?
One.
Yeah.
It was a Thursday night bonanza game a while back.
Oh, right, yeah.
It wasn't even one of the Tampa Bay games where he threw.
I think that was on
Was that Thursday night?
Thursday
Okay,
night,
good.
And one touchdown in his last 6. I still love the player.
brutal.
I just was surprised to see the number was only one 100-yard
Can I ask you a random question? Is who starts week 1 for Atlanta next year, quarterback?
Michael Penix Jr.
You think so?
I think so, yeah.
All right. They have they can get out of the
They
because
cannot.
Cousins won't be the backup.
They cannot. No.
They cannot.
But yeah, all right, interesting. Okay.
You know, the reality. So
Fascinating.
again, we're off the target a little bit here, and I'll take the blame for that. But like the reality of when you draft a quarterback who turned 24 the weekend after the draft is that like the clock is accelerated here. Right? Like Kirk is a good example of why. Is that like Kirk Cousins was aging well until he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
and then it felt like he just not like he fell off a cliff,
In that
but his
case-
production fell off a cliff.
In that case, Cousins maybe doesn't finish the season this year. I mean, you got to take a look at Penix, right? Give him a couple of games here.
Yeah.
If they're not going to make the playoffs for
I
sure.
wonder if Penix. This is a good one here then, because I play in a keeper league where he is available. I kind of like him as a keeper right now. Dynasty, he's obviously rostered, but like you might be in a keeper league where there are conditions, draft picks. I play in a keeper salary cap league, and I might snatch him. I'm in the playoffs, so I don't really know who I would drop. I need to like ensure my roster because I've had several injuries, but
sure.
Interesting one.
Especially if you haven't made the playoffs in a keeper league. This is that time of year where I look at my bench and it's like this veteran's gone, this veteran's gone, this veteran's gone, and I just pick up all young guys for the back end of my bench.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
For next year.
Yeah. Smart.
Field. Aaron Jones, 16.4 fantasy points in Week 14 against Atlanta. Over or under that against the Chicago Bears defense that's given up the 10th most fantasy points to running back.
He's been better of late. He's got 3 touchdowns over his last 3 games, 2 rushing, 1 receiving. But he has only, over the last 7 games, 2 games over 12.2. So I'll go under, but close.
I'm at 16.8, so I'm a hair over this, so I will lean slightly that direction. I think if you look at median projection, it's probably a hair under this, but it's close. Yeah, you mentioned the touchdowns, but the funny thing is, though, his touches the last 3 games are 25, 8, and 15.
Yeah, weird.
Just as scrambled as you could possibly get. But the Bears, you can run on them. This is a team that has struggled against the run, 4th highest yards per carry, 5th most yards, 9th most fantasy points, and last week, Isaac Orlando, 26.8 fantasy points against them. So I will lean toward over here for Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
I am just on the under, but I do love, we talked about it at the beginning of the year, he kind of started slow in the touchdown department. He scored in 3 straight games, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
that really,
Better, yep.
He was the unluckiest player in the league in the touchdown department, and I believe going into last week it was Jones 1, Odunze 2 in that category, and they both scored. So
a
headed the
couple
right
of my fantasy teams were actually unluckier in the touchdown department than Aaron Jones earlier in the season.
All right,
Brutal luck.
Mike, I got one more that I want to throw at you. James Conner, 22.2 fantasy points against the Seahawks. Now he draws the New England Patriots.
I mean, that's a high number. I'm going to go under on this one. My projection is still 17, so pretty optimistic. He's 11th in my running back rankings. 22 touches last week. That actually matched a season high. 10 top 20 fantasy finishes this season. Top 25 now in 7 straight. He's had an outstanding floor. And again, we almost never get to say this about fantasy players by the end of the year. He's exactly what we thought he was going to be this year, which is just... We like when that happens, but it's so rare. Of course, it's James Conner who is, because we underrate him every year, and he gets the job done. And next year we'll take him as RB9, and he'll miss a bazillion games and stink, and Trey Benson will be great. Yeah.
My answer is under as well, because that's a huge number to get to for any running back not named like peak Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, or I don't even know who else. But Conner, just appreciation, man. This guy is 5th in running back receiving yards, 11th in rushing attempts, 13th in rushing yards, like tons of volume here, really good player, kind of the heart and soul of that Arizona Cardinals offense. They need a win because they have kind of fallen out of that NFC West playoff push. The Patriots, usually a good team to run the football against.
Yeah, it's tough because for the sake of the segment, I think we're all taking under that, but he's still very clearly a guy that we're starting here in Week 15. In spite of that. Mike, I want to ask you before we move on really quickly, what's the nerdiest thing that you've done like projections or ADP for that's not fantasy football? Like, did you ever do this for any other like sports in your life or anything else that like happened for you?
Projection? I mean, I dabbled in F1 a little bit. I'm trying to think about like real life stuff though. I don't know. I've always done anything. Like when I was like in college, I made my own sort of like financial software to track money when I started to like make money on my own in Excel, stuff like that. I remember like when I first used like programming software, I had a class in high school. I made like a project where you could like pick from a list and like make a baseball lineup of your favorite players or something, like, and it would have like a number assigned to them, and it would tell you your score, like if you picked a better team than someone else, so you can do it. So like I've always been like this since I was a little kid. I would just write down I would literally pause, because we had VCRs. I would pause SportsCenter in spring training. They would do baseball stories on like 2 teams a day or something, and they would have a graphic with the starting lineups, projected starting lineups. I would literally pause it and write down the lineups for each team. Like, I love that stuff. It's been in my blood since I was born.
It's why you're the best. I keep a piggy bank, and Mike develops financial literacy software.
Exactly.
That's just how my brain works. I don't know.
It's amazing. You're one of one.
I found the next up-and-coming Mike Clay yesterday at lunch when I was talking with our friend Kaylee Mann, who actually is developing ADP for college gymnastics. She's doing a slow draft for a college gymnastics fantasy league right now. And I wasn't sure if you had ever dabbled into college gymnastics fantasy.
Kaylee's doing that?
Yes.
I cannot tell you the first thing.
Wow, Kaylee.
But that's impressive. I think I found my new best friend at this company.
Right, exactly.
But you guys are mean to me anyway, so.
How many college gymnasts can you name?
Nope.
No comment.
Nope.
Not, okay.
Simone Biles, I think, is the only, and she's not in college, obviously.
No, Livy Dunn would be the one that all Americans know.
Oh, of course.
Yep.
Yes.
She's like the most impressive athlete ever, though. Oh my
Biles,
God.
I would agree.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yep. Yeah. All right, sorry.
Stephen, I forget his last name, but he on the Pobble Horse this summer.
Oh yeah.
Penn State via, of course, the great state of Massachusetts. 2 men's gymnasts on the USA team this year from Massachusetts. So not just a dominant football state, also a dominant gymnastics state.
I love that I bring up freaking college gymnastics and feel that's something in his bag to be able to bring to the table. Like, that's how this works.
Unimportant knowledge. That's what I'm here for.
All right. When we come back, you got a lot of stuff, Field. When we come back, we're going to close things out here on Fantasy Focused Football. We'll see you guys in just a moment. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook claim your new player bonus, and for a limited time, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY to get started today. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Mike Clayfield Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp. No Stephania Bell this week, so we did not do a start of the week because we did not want to do this segment without her. I was going to ask you, though, do you guys have one just in your back pocket you wanted to give out to the people?
I do. Rico Dowdle for the Cowboys.
Oh, that's a good one.
Last 3 games, 19 rushes for 86 yards, plus 3 catches for 12 yards, 22 rushes for 112 yards and a touchdown, plus 3 catches for 11 yards. And finally, most recently, 18 rushes for 131 yards, plus 1 catch for 10 yards against the Panthers, who, of course, have been a very generous matchup all season. They have the worst run defense in the NFL by a lot.
Yeah, I didn't draw one up per se, but my answer is in the same game, which would be Chuba Hubbard.
No, that was my answer.
Oh, no way.
All right, well, who can pin it? Who can pin it?
Go ahead.
No, you go for it.
Go.
I already gave a lot of it yesterday when I did Doppler Radar. I talked about
it's
Chuba
the same
Hubbard.
thing. I mean, it's an outstanding matchup. Dallas has been terrible against running back, and the key here is he might play 95% of the snaps. He might play 100% of the snaps in this game because there's no Jonathan Brooks. There's Miles Sanders is out at least one more week. Raheem Blackshear is injured as well. He's their returner anyway. It's probably Mike Boone as the 2 in this game.
Mike Boone!
Yeah, so famous for his late season heroics. But, Hubbard should be the feature back here. He's been awesome this year, and they're just going to keep riding him into the sunset this season.
I love in that Dallas Panthers game, we've got 4 people that we trust that I can't believe that we're in this spot. But it's Chuba Hubbard, Adam Thielen, and then Rico Dowdle, and CeeDee Lamb, obviously.
Yeah.
But it feels like, all right, that's a very specific group of people there that that's where all the targets are going.
Okay, so let's do something different here in the last couple of minutes of the show. Is there a player that going into the weekend, you're sitting here saying to yourself, like, I am sweating over whether to start or sit said player?
Yes.
Oh, man.
I have 2 leagues where I have to decide between Jalen Waddle or Roma Dunze.
Oh, man.
And I feel like they are both close enough. I love the increased volume that Roma Dunze has got, taking on the Vikings, who just give up points by the boatload. He got in the end zone twice.
Is it both leagues exactly that decision?
Both leagues, I have that exact same decision.
Are you going to split them?
I literally said that to Not Cool Keith and our buddy Pierre Piquet yesterday. I think I might just start Jalen Waddle in one, Roma Dunze in the other, and that way I at least get one of the 2 big performances, and I hope that it doesn't cost me.
I think my closest one is probably our Dynasty League against Matthew, where I have Herbert, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith. I have to pick 2 of the 3 quarterbacks there. That might be the toughest
Geno
call.
and Herbert probably is my gut.
That's who I have in. Yeah, I think that's the way I'm going because Russ is playing the Eagles. So,
right. Yeah.
Do you have anything like that, Field, where you're sweating it out?
The most difficult decision that I am sweating out right now, I have a league where you get big points bonuses for 100 yards receiving or rushing and long plays. So Christian Watson has a bit more appeal than normal.
Sure.
And so I've got Christian Watson versus potentially Josh Palmer if Ladd McConkey is out. I think he'll be in. That's one that we play several. We don't have any kickers. We go a lot of flexes in that league. So I don't know.
This is the time. We're sweating it out right along with you fine folks at home. I'll tell you what, trying to thread the needle when I've got 3 rosters that have Jalen Waddle on it, and I'm facing him in 2 others. So it's one of those
we
tough
want bragging rights around here, okay? And we have a bunch of leagues together. FF Now, Focus, the Dynasty League. So we got to win these things.
We appreciate you guys for hanging out with us. Today's show is presented by Wingstop. Don't forget to love each other, be kind to yourself, and good luck here in Week 15. You can survive. That's 0 from Cooper Kupp this week.
We'll see you.
See you guys on Sunday.
Monday. Sunday.
Playoffs.
Playoffs.